Peter Stursberg was born in China in 1913. His mother was half Japanese and half Irish, and his father was a member of the colonial administration, the British colonial administration in China. So he grew up in a curious kind of imperial household of mixed race, and ultimately ended up in Canada when he was very early 20s and started his career as a journalist. He had become one of the very first people working for the CBC News. This is around 1938, and the CBC had just set up a news department. And of course, like he would have been at the time in 1938, 25 years old, say. So like everybody, every journalist of the period, when the war broke out, the number one thing they wanted to do was they wanted to go to cover the war. So finally in 1942, they agreed to send him, and in early 1943, he arrived in London. He covered them first of all in the invasion of Sicily, and then as they progressed up Italy and across the so-called Hitler line, so he followed the Canadian troops all through Italy. Then he followed the Canadian troops for the liberation of Holland, and then he ended up in Berlin just shortly after VE Day. And through the course of it all, of course, what he was doing was he was reporting on how the war was going from the point of view of Canada. And so it was the first time that people could actually hear what war sounded like. There's a famous piece of my father broadcasting from the Lawrie line in Italy, where you can hear him say, "Listen to the guns roar."
Just listen to those guns roar.
And then you hear the guns in the background. So it was actually allowed, and the Canadians were the only ones who had this technology, it actually allowed the Canadians to bring people into the sound of the war in a way that had never happened before.
We're in the attic of an old Italian farmhouse that overlooks the front as it's on a slight ridge. I'm standing here looking out of a hole in the wall that was made by a shell during the fighting here 2 days ago. This house, though, hasn't really been very badly damaged. It's the only one standing that I've seen for miles around.
Peter Stursberg landing in Sicily was the first time a Canadian broadcaster had covered Canadian troops on the move. He arrived just in time to cover the liberation of one of the key objectives of the Canadian force that landed in Sicily, the town of Agira, which was liberated in late July 1943. And so he came basically the evening of the battle and was able to get there when the town square had been liberated, and the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada pipe band was playing, the church bells in the background. It was able to broadcast for the first time Canadians liberating European city. After years of really bad news in the wartime news coming from the CBC and elsewhere, this was quite an event. During the Second World War, radio was the only electronic media. There was print reporting, there was certainly newsreel and film that had been around for some time, and photographic reporting was certainly available. But radio was at the cutting edge of technology. It was a way to bring, with only a few hours delay in some cases, or at the least a day or more a delay, reporting of real live sounds from the battlefield into people's living rooms in a way that had never been the case before. This was done through very bulky, by today's standards, portable recording units that weighed dozens of pounds each, that were carted on a jeep that could then be brought to a mobile recording van and all of this sort of thing. But the result was that broadcasters like Stursberg were able to lay live commentary over events as they happened.
It's a great honor for the School of Journalism and Communication to host the annual Peter Stursberg Foreign Correspondents Lecture. We're in the business here of training young journalists, and down the road, some of them will likely end up reporting from conflict zones. The Stursberg Lecture Series is one way of ensuring that when they do, the journalism they produce will be smart and meaningful. Hearing from the best of today's foreign correspondents can't help but inspire journalists of the future to do their best, and hopefully their journalism will also contribute to more informed decision-making around the world.